We need to talk about rumours because they're endemic on the internet at the best of times, and at a time like this, with new Nintendo hardware on the way, the energy from the Nintendo rumour mill could power several medium-sized countries. But how valuable are rumours? How should we evaluate their likelihood? What are the pitfalls to watch out for? Settle in to a Nintendo forecast deep dive on Nintendo rumours. And let's look through the major issues with rumours of this kind. Issue 1. Source uncertainty. Although there are potentially tens of thousands of possible sources of information about Nintendo's future moves, ranging from their employees to their retail partners and other collaborators, the vast majority of these people are not likely to risk the reputational and frankly legal consequences for the short-term thrill of being right on the internet. Nevertheless, if a source is available to one person, they are more likely to be available to multiple people. Therefore, it's possible to imagine that one person could independently provide a source to multiple people without this information necessarily being in any way accurate. There are even reports that Nintendo has used fake leaks to flush people out, such as the long-rumoured Star Fox racing title. The point is that hearing 3 different versions of the same information does not necessarily make the information 3 times as credible. But more than that, one person leaking can actually make the likelihood of another person sharing their information the less. Let's say that Anne, Bob, Clive and Dave each have a source about a big October game. Anne's source and Clive's, which remember may well be the same source, both say it's a major 3D Mario. Bob's source and Dave's both say it's a huge 3D Zelda. The chances of them all being right are low. Now, each has, let's say, a 50-50 certainty in their source, enough to find it interesting, but not enough to put it online necessarily. In fact, only one person out of the 4, Anne, does so. She goes on the internet and shares that she has confidence in a forthcoming 3D Mario this holiday season. Now, Clive thinks, okay, if she's heard this, I can share my source too, and now this source is double confirmed. But just as importantly, Bob and Dave both look at their Zelda source and decide that if they were on the fence about sharing it before, now they're keeping quiet because it looks like the consensus is that it's going to be a Mario game and not a Zelda one. If all 4 people shared the information, people might think of it as a coin toss likelihood, but because some people went first, we have 2 credible sources pointing to Mario, and probably 3 or 4 once a couple of people leap on the trend in the hope of being tipped as a future expert leaker. Which brings us to issue 2. Educated guesswork is eminently possible. This channel has got some Nintendo calls right and some spectacularly wrong. I did my last major roundup a few months ago, but on occasion I do check back in, and although I've got a reasonable track record on the aggregate, any individual forecast is dicier. This is why I express those forecasts in terms of percentages as to how confident I am. A current example is that why I tipped Goodfield to be the developers of Princess Peach Showtime, and that did turn out to be correct. I also thought Ilka were the most likely candidates to be developing for the new Mario and Luigi Brothership game, which appears not to be the case. I make no claims to knowing exactly what will happen, but I do aspire that my bad calls will balance out my good calls on a reliable enough basis that a 90% forecast will come to pass 90% of the time, and just as importantly, will not come true 10% of the time. Still, clearly, it is possible to forecast even a company as unpredictable as Nintendo with at least reasonable accuracy some of the time, and so it's not that big a step on from this approach to try to pass off notions as actual rumours. And while that may describe some less scrupulous leakers, even people with genuine information may be guilty of adding 2 and 2 and getting 22, because it's rare that information can be relayed wholesale without disclosing a source, and so inevitably as part of this relaying process, information is framed in a way that might not quite be accurate. If you had information about Nintendo launching something with a new operating system, the overwhelming logic of that statement would lead you to think new Switch system. It would not lead you to think Alamo. Philip Tetlock is someone to whom this channel's concept owes a debt, as he was the author of the seminal book on forecasting communities, Super Forecasting. However, in his prior book, Expert Political Judgement, he looked at and tracked journalists, academics, and senior advisors to politicians, and specifically looked at what their forecasts were. The great and good should theoretically be highly informed and able to identify exactly what is about to happen. As it turned out, Tetlock's conclusion was that the average expert was roughly as accurate as a dart-throwing chimpanzee. Of course, the aura of expertise these people have not only means that their opinions carry more weight, but that their mistakes will be less likely to be written off as absolute nonsense. It's perfectly possible this channel will also be about as accurate as a dart-throwing chimpanzee over the long term. Indeed, it's probably more likely than not, but fundamental to the channel's approach is the combination of educated guesses with accountability, which should allow the potential for judgment correction over time. Issue 3, though, is herding behaviour. To explain this, let's hear from Daniel Kahneman, who wrote one of my all-time favourite non-fiction books, Thinking Fast and Slow. This, though, is from his more recent book Noise, co-authored with Oliver Siboni and Cass R. Sunstein. The authors say, "We have pointed to the wisdom of crowds. If you take a large group of people and ask them a question, there is a good chance that the average answer will be close to the target. Aggregating judgments can be an excellent way of reducing noise and therefore error. But what happens if people are listening to one another? You might well think that their doing so is likely to help. After all, people can learn from one another and thus figuring out what is right. Under favourable circumstances in which people share what they know, deliberating groups can indeed do well. But independence is a prerequisite for the wisdom of crowds. If people are not making their own judgments and are relying instead on what other people think, crowds might not be so wise after all. Research has revealed exactly that problem. In simple estimation tasks, the number of crimes in a city, population increases over specified periods, the length of borders between nations, crowds were indeed wise as long as they registered their views independently. But if they learned the estimates of other people, for example, the average estimate of a group of 12, the crowd did worse. As the authors put it, social influences are a problem because they reduce group diversity without diminishing the collective error. The irony is that while multiple independent opinions, properly aggregated, can be strikingly accurate, even a little social influence can produce a kind of herding that undermines the wisdom of crowds. We often see this kind of thing with opinion pollsters around elections. Fearful of having a sample that is not fully accurate, if opinion pollsters have outlying data, there is a soft pressure to suppress or query it for fear of ridicule for putting out something that seems to bear no reality to the facts on the ground, and indeed may be accused of misleading or putting their thumbs on the scale. This cautious approach is understandable, but if every pollster moderates its data in this way, then you get an anchoring effect where multiple independent pollsters make a particular outcome seem credible and only increase the pressure going forward to herd. If all the pollsters converge on the same point, which is largely illusory, and the actual original data is progressively more obscured, the problem only becomes worse. Of course, the same thing can happen in the rumour space. Just look at Nintendo YouTube and you will see trends in terms of content, sometimes on fairly flimsy evidence. But as the same talking points ricochet around the internet, the ideas become familiar, and that familiarity intrinsically makes people find them plausible. And once you get a few key figures, especially again people with a track record or senior journalists herding, then it becomes difficult to stand out from the crowd. I'm fortunate to have always had a very high likes to dislikes ratio on my videos, usually 98 or 99% likes. However, a curious thing that I have noticed is that my like ratio on some videos is noticeably worse, and that is for topics which relate to bad news, and the only reason I can think is that people decide to rate the news, not the video. In this sense, YouTube subtly disincentivizes people from going against the current narratives, and that's before you get into the many other kinds of social pressure people in a social media landscape have to face when going against the grain. All of these lead to herding of opinions, whether based on fact or just based on illusion. Issue 4, though, is that we end up assessing sources and not statements. Now, I let most rumours go by without much comment. Partly this is because there are many other channels in this Nintendo news space, channels I watch and enjoy, and I never see the point in trying to compete directly in the same space. In fact, I don't even consider Nintendo Forecast to be a news channel so much as an analysis channel. But more than that, there's really no way to reliably assess the veracity of a rumour because, by definition, the derivation is murky. Sales data, economic circumstances, physical circumstances, Nintendo's own statements, all these are hard facts. You can interpret them in different ways, of course, but we can assess their veracity and their pertinence to the issue in question quite freely. But with rumours, we end up trying to assess the likelihood of particular leakers being accurate or not. I've been asked if I'd do a ranking of rumour mongers, and I can see the attraction of the idea. I've heard other YouTubers talk about some people being tier 1 leakers, although I've not seen the actual tiering system being used and how it works. But basically, what you end up assessing isn't the likelihood of the particular thing happening, but the value or lack of value of the leaker. Now, I'm sure this appeals endlessly to the kind of ego-driven individuals who decide to spread Nintendo gossip on the internet while pretending to be insiders, but I don't know that it leads to any greater enlightenment for the rest of us. And fundamentally, there are fewer sources of information to draw on when considering an individual leaker's judgment than there are when considering Nintendo holistically. Moreover, we underestimate how important it is that luck plays a part in this. Let's take a theoretical leaker who has made 3 consecutive great calls on the bounce, and all of them have been right. For round numbers, let's say that these are each 10% chances, not impossibilities, but still real long shots. One 10% call being right is a 10% chance, but 3 in a row, that's a 0.1% chance. There's a 1 in 1,000 chance that this person just lucked into such an amazing, perceptive set of guesses. Surely then you may be thinking to yourself, a leaker with a 1 in 1,000 record should be accredited top billing on every YouTube Nintendo prediction video there is, their words tweeted like precious nuggets of gold. But here's the thing. What if there were actually 1,000 people making claims about Nintendo? And it's hardly impossible to imagine that there are 1,000 people ready to shoot their mouth off with Nintendo-based claims. Out of these 1,000, 100 actually called the first thing right purely by luck. It was a 1 in 10 chance, and they were ones of the 1 in 10. But nobody notices too much because it seems like a lucky guess, and of course, while a 10% chance is unlikely in the absolute sense, it's not like it's so wild a forecast that the day will be named in the person's honour. Then the second guess comes. Out of our 100 lucky guesses, 10 are lucky twice. And I'm sure you can see where I'm going with this. On the third guess, it's a 1 in 10 chance, which means that out of these 10 doubly lucky folk, one of these people is going to hit the treble. So then word gets out that there's somebody who's got 3 long odds guesses on the bounce, and they get elevated to Nintendo Internet godhood, while the people who just got 2 guesses on the bounce are forgotten about. And the thing is, a lot of the people hailed as rumour gurus aren't even that accurate to that degree. Humans have a marvellous capacity to make things fit. Well, they said September and the beginning of November is basically the same. Well, they said a 2D Mario, but Wario is kind of like Mario. Well, he said Eternal Darkness was coming in 2021, but maybe Nintendo are just sitting on it like they did with Metroid Prime. In a creator economy where money runs on clicks, there is an incentive for people to try to fit a narrative to frame things positively. Even when caveated, the effect is hardly one of reserve, but rather of, this could be nothing, so let's be skeptical, but also, wow, if true, this is huge, so let's talk about it for 3 straight videos. To be clear, this is not a criticism or attack on anybody in the Nintendo predictions community in the slightest, and while I'm more hesitant about picking up on rumours than some might be, I have definitely done this, and there are creators I absolutely love and follow regularly who spend a lot of time deconstructing rumour content. I think it's fun, I think it's entertaining, I just like watching those videos. But the fact that I like it and the fact that these are good people and good creators doesn't change the underlying likelihoods that the Switch Pro probably won't be coming out with Wind Waker HD and a new Donkey Kong. So what's causing us to think it will? Which leads us to issue 5, the optimism bias. Look, we all naturally want to believe good outcomes, but did you know that an optimistic framing intrinsically makes us more credulous, and the reverse is also true? Going back to Daniel Kahneman and the company's book Noise, the point is made. Inducing good moods makes people more receptive to BS and more gullible in general. They are less apt to detect deception or identify misleading information. Conversely, eyewitnesses who are exposed to misleading information are better able to disregard it and to avoid false testimony when they're in a bad mood. For most of the time waiting for Tears of the Kingdom, the notion of the title taking 6 years, let alone even longer, was a massive outside likelihood even during the COVID era. It was consistently claimed to be right around the corner, including in official communication from Nintendo, who pushed the possibility of a 2022 release themselves. The same with the Switch successor. Even though Nintendo has told us for years that they expect the Switch to have a longer than normal lifespan, most people's central expectations did not encompass a release as far out as 2025. In both cases, over the years, my judgments have been on the more critical end. Even before starting the channel, my hunches erred on the side of a longer wait, but in neither case did I think it especially likely that the wait would be quite as long as it turned out to be. We all figured an iterative sequel to Breath of the Wild would probably take less time, or at least the same amount of time, compared to a fully original title, and even with COVID factored in, the same time frame as from Skyward Sword to Breath of the Wild, 5 1/3 years, seemed reasonable as an outside chance for the length of time it would take. Therefore, years out, I generally expected 2021 to 2022, but even I thought 2023 was unduly pessimistic, and I can't think of anybody who was reliably claiming that 2023 was their expected launch date for the next Zelda game. And the thing is, we compensate for these judgments after the fact. Yeah, Metroid Prime 4 was way later than we'd ever have thought, but the production was rebooted. Sure, Tears of the Kingdom was late, but COVID. But we only see a few of the issues that cause unexpected delays, and yet, over a long time period, the chances of these kinds of black swan events having an impact has to be higher, even if they're ones that we don't know about, including personal issues for the developers, or financial problems at the company. Nintendo is exceptionally cautious about its release dates and announcements, but even then there are revisions. Games are pushed back, and sometimes considerably. Fire Emblem Three Houses was delayed by over a year after being announced for spring 2018. One of the reasons I appraise even forecasts which seem near certain, based on Nintendo's actual statements, as 90% as a maximum, is that we are wired to present bias, ignoring the many weird and wonderful things that can happen in between. If you imagine 5 years from now, you're probably picturing a world which is broadly the same as it is today, but how different did the world of 5 years ago look, let alone of 10 years ago, of 20, of 30? Plus, sometimes the new idea is just the most exciting. I've been guilty of pushing up the certainty of a forecast, not because I want to mislead, but because in the moment I thought it was particularly exciting, even when I then realised on sober reflection that the likelihood was far less than I first thought. Equally, many times I felt caught up in a hype cycle, to the extent that I'd consider moderating long-term predictions. Also, frankly, and especially on YouTube, the financial incentives are such that some news topics drive engagement far more than the rest, hence many Switch 2 videos. Personally, I like the channel to have a bit of a balance, but if I look back through my statistics, it's very clear that the most profitable videos are almost exclusively focused on the Switch successor. Now, of course, set against all these issues is the problem that rumours do, sometimes, even perhaps often, turn out to be true. Games leak, uploads are put out in error, people gossip, plus some people just get lucky. And now and then it gets to the point that a person, Puro being the most obvious example, is so reliable that their words are basically spoilers, so I tend to avoid them then for the different reason then it kind of takes the gamesmanship out of forecasting at all. You see, my argument in this video is not that rumours are intrinsically bad and should be avoided. In essence, YouTube is entertaining, and as I've addressed on this channel before, variable rewards are intrinsically more entertaining. It's why in some senses the odd Duff Direct doesn't do Nintendo all that much harm, because the uncertainty is intrinsically exciting. It's also why frankly sometimes it's a lot more fun to enjoy the sizzle of what's impossible than face the grim reality of what is probably impossible. I don't plan to stop enjoying rumour videos, and if I don't cover them on the channel, it's often as much because other people do great thorough jobs of those kind of rumour reviews, so I don't feel a video from me adds something new to the conversation as for any other reason. You'll even see me discussing rumours from time to time. I've not got a hard and fast policy against them, but I do tend to value other contextual sources more highly, and I think these add more to the overall conversation. For more on my past forecasts, check out my previous rundown on the screen right now. You can also support the channel and see exclusive content on my Patreon. Thank you for watching to the end. Thanks even more if you engaged with the content in some way, and I will see you next time for another Nintendo forecast.